Hi everyone, the Partial Prophet here. I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, and then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. So today I wanted to talk about Trump in the 77th plus 7th week. So first we'll give you an update. I got some new information, and so I wanted to update something that I said in one of my previous videos. I was talking about the seventh king maybe being, or the first king being Netanyahu. And so that came out of Revelation 17, where it talks about, here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. And there are 7 kings. 5 have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. The beast which was and is not is himself also an 8th, and is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. So I talked about how I believe that the 8th is Obama. I still believe that. And I don't remember if I mentioned about the 10 horns, the 10 kings being connected to the 10 toes of the statue. So I did want to bring that up. So my new thinking is, instead of Netanyahu being the 7th one or the first one, I think the 7th one is Messiah. And I'll explain to you why I think that. What I did was I looked at the 7 mountains in Revelation, or this, and how they connect to the 7 churches. And so what we have is, okay, so I wrote a list here of the 7 churches. And so you got Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. Okay, so I did kind of a really short summary of what God said about each of these 7 churches. And so for Ephesus, he said that they had lost their first love. And then for Smyrna, he talked about how they were about to have tribulation for 10 days. And that they were suffering tribulation. And then Pergamum was tolerating the teachings of Balaam, and Thyatira was tolerating Jezebel. And then for about Sardis, it says you are dead, even though they believed they were alive. And then Philadelphia, we all know about Philadelphia, that we hear a lot about that church. Philadelphia means like brotherly love. And so God said for Philadelphia that he was going to keep him from the hour of testing. And then there's the church of Laodicea, where God said, talked about them being neither cold nor hot, and wishing they would be one or the other. And then how they said, they believe they are rich. So I stuck in the names of the presidents, which I thought connected to these 7 churches, and it kind of works a little bit here. And so with Ephesus, I put Reagan in there, and I talked in my video about with Reagan how he had a love for Israel. And so I'm wondering if we have kind of like lost our love for Israel, like Reagan had when he was president in this country. Definitely I think the presidents have. And then so for the second one, for Smyrna, I put Bush Senior. And it connects to the chart, the timing, the statue, and the order of these presidents. I didn't really know, how Smyrna kind of connects to Bush Senior, except for maybe that it was like the start of, well, I don't know if it was the start of, but I know that during Bush Senior, I think he had some anti-Israel policies, and so there might have been some natural disasters in America that happened during his time when he was president. So maybe that's what God is saying about that. Maybe that there's the connection there. And then Pergamum taught, God said it, they tolerated the teachings of Balaam. That could definitely be connected to Clinton, because they're definitely very non-religious, definitely very left-minded. So definitely a big connection there. And then for Terra, I don't know how to say that, but they tolerated Jezebel. And so I put Bush Jr. down there. And, so it was kind of like, God was kind of happy with this church, except for the fact that they tolerated Jezebel. And I could definitely see that with Bush Jr., that there was like, I thought he had kind of a strong faith, but there was some leftism kind of creeping into his, the way that he was running the country and stuff like that. And then the fifth church, Sardis, where God said, "You are dead." Okay, so let me find this in my Bible here. This one definitely reminded me of Obama. And so it said, so in Revelation, this is in Revelation 3, it said, okay, to the angel of the church in Sardis write, these are the words of him who holds the seven spirits of God and the seven stars. I know your deeds. You have a reputation of being alive, but you are dead. Wake up, strengthen what remains and is about to die, for I have not found your deeds complete in the sight of my God. Remember, therefore, what you have received and heard, obey it and repent. But if you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know at what time I will come to you. And then it says, yet you have a few people in Sardis who have not soiled their clothes. They will walk with me dressed in white, for they are worthy. He who overcomes will, like them, be dressed in white. So when I'm saying that they're connected to the president, I'm not saying, especially with Obama, that, like they're the head of this church or something like that. Like, I think it has a little bit to do with the time frame. Like, I think maybe God could be looking at the country overall, during these presidents, time in office, and just kind of the what would you call it, the general spiritual, I'll say it this way, the general spiritual health of the country during these presidents' time. Let's say it that way, because that sounds really good. And so that was Sardis, and that definitely would connect to Obama, because really, Christianity really died during the time of Obama's time in office. And then for Philadelphia, God was very positive. He didn't have anything negative to say about Philadelphia. And so I was wondering if that church is like connected to the Messiah. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then the seventh church, Laodicea. Let me read that one, because I want you to think about if it reminds you of President Trump. Okay. So, oops. Did we lose? Sorry. Okay. So, here's what it says. This is in Revelation 3:14. To the angel of the church in Laodicea write, these are the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the ruler of God's creation. I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. You say, I am rich, I have acquired wealth and do not need a thing, but you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire, so you can become rich, and white clothes to wear so you can cover your shameful nakedness, and salve to put on your eyes so you can see. Those whom I love I rebuke and discipline, so be earnest and repent. Here I am, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him and he with me. So, one thing that I thought was interesting in these verses is I like where it says, "Here I am, I stand at the door and knock," because that can be really cool, because that would mean we are going to be seeing, the Messiah during the time of President Trump's presidency. And then I definitely see a connection to President Trump, especially with the statement, I wish you were either one or the other. Because that's kind of been my complaint about President Trump, is that, sometimes he does some really good things and some really good conservative and pro-religious stuff. But then other times he does other things that, are almost kind of against God. Because I like earlier in the year, I think he had, I know, it was like right at the beginning, like May 30th, right before the LGBT Pride Month started, and he was encouraging the LGBT people, so you definitely don't know where he stands, because he's kind of all over the map. And so I can definitely see a connection to Trump, and then there would be a connection to the people that follow him, and support him, because right now we have, how he made the statement about those 4 women, that are in Congress, and talked about them going back to their countries, and his supporters won't, just say, well, that was kind of a terrible thing that he said, and so, so we kind of don't have people that are really representing God well, that, sometimes people don't want to criticize President Trump, and really we need to, be willing to, if he does things, that aren't praiseworthy, we need to call him to the carpet on that. Okay, so sorry about that. I already jumped ahead into the slide, but let me talk about this slide. So, in the verses in Revelation 17, it talks about 5 of the mountains, or 5 of the kings, I guess is what it says, have fallen. And so we could see that, if we take, these 5 presidents, they're no longer presidents, so you could say that they have fallen. Or you could see with these 5 churches that, God had a complaint about each of them. So in some way they have fallen. And so then the verse goes on to say one is, okay, so it says there are 7 kings, 5 have fallen, one is, and the other has not yet come. And so I highlighted one is, and so I was thinking the one is could be connected to, Philadelphia, which one, there wasn't anything negative that God said about Philadelphia. And then the other thing too is that, like with Messiah, obviously, the Messiah is always there. So that would be the connection, that, because what God says about Jesus being the beginning and the end, and so that would be a connection to Messiah. And then, so for the last church, it says the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he must remain a little while. And so, so that would be a connection to President Trump, where it says, that he would just remain a little while. I do not believe that he's going to live out his 4 years as president. I don't think the world can hold together that long. Because I mean, you know, things are just really tense right now, and I think it'd be a miracle if um, things can continue the way they are. I really think something's gonna bust and something needs to happen. So, okay, what I wanted to show too was with the 7 mountains and the 7 churches, they connect to the lampstand that we read about um, when in the beginning of the Bible, where it talks about the temple and the tabernacle and the description of the lampstand. And so I drew a picture of the lampstand. And so I did this numbering of the lampstand, and I've heard this from other people too, where they believe that the lampstand is a chiastic structure. And so I get that information, like Kalisa Alawine teaches that. And then if you want to learn about chiastic structures, I definitely would watch Tony Robinson's videos from Restoration of Torah. He does a good job of describing chiastic structures. So they believe, or Halisa teaches about the lampstand being a chiastic structure, and I don't know, if she read that like in some rabbinical writings. I don't know if rabbis teach that. I'm not sure where it comes from. But so if we look at the 7 churches with this chiastic structure, what you have is that you take the first branch, the first light, and connect it to the 4th light, and then you take the 2nd light and connect it to the 5th light, and then you take the 3rd light and connect it to the 6th light. And you could see in my drawing kind of how they're connected. And so what that would get is and so when I put it on the lampstand, I kind of switched where it's interesting because God lists Philadelphia as the 6th church, and then Laodicea as the 7th church. But I put it on the lampstand where, like, I believe that, obviously Jesus is the middle lamp, because that's the one that's always burning. And so, it's really interesting to me that, like, for Philadelphia, it's either 6 or 7. Because when it talks about, the number 666, it talks about 6 being the number of man. And I connect kind of the 666 as being kind of an analogy to the times that, like Trump did something to cause, bad things to happen to the Jewish people. And so if 6 is the number of man, it'd be interesting that Philadelphia was the number 6. And then then if we made Laodicea number 6, that would connect to the 666. But it's also interesting that it was the 7th church, because we see a lot of connections with 7 and 70 and stuff to President Trump. And so that was kind of interesting to me. And then back to the chiastic structure. So putting 1 and 4 together, that would put Reagan and Bush Jr. together. And I thought that was interesting because I did feel like Reagan, definitely had a strong faith in God, and then Bush Jr. had a strong faith in God. And I didn't really see that as much with Bush Sr. Definitely didn't see that with Obama. Definitely didn't see that with Clinton. So I thought it was interesting that they kind of ended up on the same branch. And then if you put 2 and 5 together, that would be Bush Sr. and Obama. And so some of the connections that I would say would be, that I heard that Bush Sr., did have some policies that were anti-Israel. And we definitely saw Obama, did a lot of stuff that was anti-Israel. And then the third branch, the third and the sixth would connect Clinton and Trump, which is kind of interesting. I mean, it's interesting because we know there's kind of the connection with Bill Clinton's wife, Hillary, with Trump, and there's like, I would maybe say there's like a little bit of immaturity in both Clinton and Trump, so it's definitely something that would be interesting to explore. Okay, and so then taking my picture of the Daniel statue, so if you kind of connect these put circles around these, that would kind of connect Reagan, being the breast of silver and then the arm of silver, with Bush, which is kind of interesting when you think about the bear, that being connected to the statue, how the bear was kind of stood up on one side, kind of, and so kind of like Bush and Obama are like maybe the fallen side of the bear, Bush Sr., because they had negative policies toward Israel, but then Reagan and Bush Jr., would be like standing up in God's eyes because they were a little bit, well, Reagan was definitely really pro-Israel. And Bush, at least Bush didn't do anything that was against Israel. And you could say that his war in, his willingness to fight in Iraq was like a pro-Israel decision. It helped Israel. And then, and then connecting, Bill Clinton and Trump. So what's interesting is, when I drew out the statue and put the people on the statue, I kind of put it in chronological order. But if you actually moved Bill Clinton, like switched Bill Clinton and Hillary, it would be interesting because Hillary and John Kerry would be on the same leg. They're both the Secretary of States of Obama. And then you would have, Obama, Bill Clinton, and Trump, the three presidents kind of all in a row. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. Okay, and so I did want to bring out, okay, so I was talking about, it was interesting to me how Philadelphia was kind of listed as the sixth church, and then Laodicea was listed as the seventh church. And so what if we take these last three churches and list them out, so we have Sardis, and then we have Philadelphia, and we have Laodicea. And so the picture that we have, if you put, Obama as Sardis and Messiah as Philadelphia and Laodicea as Trump, we have that picture where, remember, Jesus was on the cross in between two criminals. We see a repeat of that pattern with just those three churches right there, with the Messiah in the middle, and two thieves on either side, and and so I think that's kind of interesting because that's definitely a pattern that gets repeated, and we see that in various places. It could connect to like Joseph with the not the two thieves, Joseph with the cupbearer and the baker. Okay, so then while we're looking at this lampstand, I also maybe saw that there could be a possible pattern in the 7 months of this year with that lampstand. And so I wanted to draw that out and talk about that. And so we have the first 7 months of the year. And what was interesting in the first 3 months of this year, there was a super moon for the first 3 months of the year, so that would be the left side of the lampstand. And then, so I wrote out what happened on each of the months. In January, we had the super blood wolf moon, and it was the new year for trees on the Jewish calendar. And then January 21st was the start of the third year of President Trump. And then in February, on February 19th, we had the super snow moon, and that was also Purim Minor, which, because it was leap year, that would have been the date of Purim, but it was the leap month, and so they didn't celebrate it until the next month. And so then in March, we had on the 21st, we had the super worm moon. And then that was when they actually celebrated Purim. And then that was when Trump made his announcement to recognize the Golan Heights. And then in April, we had Easter was on 4/21, Passover was the 19th through the 26th. In May, on 5/19 was, what would be like the second Passover. And that's, when people, if they are unclean because of a dead man, they would celebrate a second Passover the next month. So that would be on 5/19. And then June, on June 6th, oh, sorry, I'm getting confused. On the 9th through the 10th of June was Shavuot, the 2 days of Shavuot. And then on the 22nd, that was when Kushner released his financial plans for the peace plan. And then in July, on the 2nd, we had the total solar eclipse. And then right now, the 16th through the 17th, we're having a lunar eclipse. And so then if you do the same thing with the chiastic structure, that would connect January with April. And so I thought that was interesting because on the 21st of April was when you had Easter, and then January you had the super blood wolf moon, and the new year for trees, and the start of the third year. So that was kind of interesting to me that there's kind of a connection to Easter. And then also, like, January is our New Year's, and then for Passover time is the New Year's on the Jewish calendar. And then in February, okay, so then connecting the second month and the fifth month would connect February with May. And I thought that was interesting because I see, like Purim Minor could be kind of considered like a hidden festival, because it wasn't a real actual, it's not really actually celebrated by the Jewish people at all. And then, like the second Passover could be considered like a hidden festival because, it's not, actually, celebrated as Passover. The Jewish people do acknowledge the second Passover, like for one day, so I thought that was kind of interesting that there's kind of this concept of hidden festivals, on the second month and the fifth month. And so, it kind of led me to ask, is there going to be a hidden festival, which I'm hoping in the seventh month, to kind of continue that pattern. And then chiastically connecting the third month and the sixth month. And so what was interesting about that is that in March you had the super warm moon and Purim and the Golan Heights announcement by President Trump. And, so this is really fascinating. So that's connected to June, where, that was the month that, on the 22nd, where Kushner released his financial plans. So that's definitely a very interesting connection. And it's interesting that the third branch and the sixth branch are, kind of right next to, kind of surrounding the seventh branch, so the seventh branch in the middle, kind of that same picture again where, Jesus in the middle of the two thieves, and so you have the two sixes on either side of, Jesus. Um, so that is kind of interesting, very interesting. Um, and yes. So there was something else I was going to say about that, but I can't remember now. Okay. And so what I thought was interesting too is that when Jesus was on the cross, there was darkness from the 6th hour to the 9th hour. And so I wrote out, like the 6th month of June and the 7th month of July. And then I was thinking, so what if you take the 8th month and the 9th month? So, we already discussed what happened in June and July. So one thought I had was, what if we see judgment on Netanyahu and Israel in the 7th month? And so I wrote not on 7-Eleven is already passed, so we're not gonna, we didn't see judgment. At least I didn't see anything on 7-Eleven. But I'm wondering if maybe that could be happening on 777, and I'll talk about that later in the video. And then I thought, what if on 8-11, okay, so 8-11 is Tisha B'Av, and you know, I was wondering if we were going to see judgment on President Trump on that day. And there was some verses in the scriptures that kind of connected the numbers 8-11 to President Trump, and I don't remember them right now. Oh, I know. I bet it has to do with. Let me look this up. Maybe by the grace of God, I could pull this out really quickly here. When it's talking about let's see. Okay, the beast. No, there's not. I didn't know if, like in Revelation 13, where it talks about the beast, if there was a connection to 8-11. There wasn't a connection there. Let's see, 8-11 of Revelation. Okay, this is it. I found it. Oh, praise the Lord. Okay, I found it. So in Revelation 8:11, it's talking about a great star blazing like a torch fell from the sky on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. And so 8:11, verse 11 says, the name of the star is wormwood. A third of the waters turned bitter, and many people died from the waters that had become bitter. Now I have a belief that this is very possibly talking about President Trump. And so, so that's why I was kind of wondering if 8/11 was the day we were going to see judgment on Trump. And, so that's connected to Tisha B'Av, which is, when the temples, the temple was destroyed and stuff like that. So there's a whole, it's a Jewish day where there was a lot of things that happened on that day. And, so I'll let other people explain more about that to you in their videos. So that's 8/11. And then 9/11, I was wondering if we were going to see judgment on America, that it would kind of continue that pattern of 9/11, where we saw, the terrorist attack in 2001. And so, we've definitely seen a lot of connections to 9/11. So that was a thought that I had. I was wondering if we were going to see like an end of the 45 days of the Antichrist, who I believe is Obama. Um, that would, if we see Jesus coming in this month, then, maybe there would be, um, 45 days after Jesus leaves. Because, I believe Jesus is coming for like 7 days and then he leaves for 45 days. And so the timing would work if he came in this month, that, there would be 45 days for Obama, to do all his desolation, before 9/11. So that was my thinking on that. Okay, so I've talked a lot about Daniel 9, and so I wanted to get back to that because now that things have happened, I'm kind of putting this more together. Making more of a connection with what's been happening. And so now I'm thinking I'm understanding this a little bit more. So I wanted to explain to you what I was thinking with Daniel 9. And so let me read this to you. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. Then, after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end there will be war. Desolations are determined. And he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wings of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So, in this chapter, we see Daniel was wondering, because he was looking at, the 70-year time frame, and and he was praying and he was wondering kind of what was going on, and Gabriel came, and explained to him, okay, more is going to happen. It's not just 70 years. We got 70 weeks, and then we also have 7 weeks, and we have 62 weeks. And so what I have proposed in my other videos is that ever since President Trump made his declaration on December 6th in 2017, we started this clock ticking. And so things have kind of been matching, kind of these numbers. And so here's, what I came out with is, okay, so 12/6/17 was the decree to restore Jerusalem that comes out of this verse. That's when I think the time clock started, okay? And we know on May 14th was the 70 years. We know that. And so that was when the U.S. Embassy was dedicated in Jerusalem. So that's the 70-year kind of fulfillment. And then in 70 weeks after Trump made this declaration, in December 6, 2017, 70 weeks later, that was when we saw Netanyahu being reelected. And then I saw that 7 weeks after December 6th was January 24th, 2018, was when Pence was in Israel. And there's a video where, he was talking about, well, either he or Netanyahu were talking about how close Israel and America were. And then I wrote down on the 77 weeks, so if we take the 70 weeks and we add them, it says there'll be 7 weeks, kind of add those two together, and come up with 77 weeks. That was May 29th of this year. And that was when Prime Minister Netanyahu could not form his government and they called for new elections in Israel. And then 62 weeks after December 6th was February 13th. And that was when they had the Warsaw Peace Conference, Peace in the Middle East Conference. And then I go over these dates like in some of my previous videos, and have pictures too and stuff like that. And so if you want a little bit more information, you can see some of my earlier videos. But I was wondering, I was thinking a second quote unquote 62 weeks could be March 21st of this year, because that was when Trump recognized the Golan Heights. So now on the schedule, it was actually the 67th week. But if we look at, I'm wondering if this is what God is doing. Okay, so when President Trump first made his declaration, that was the first 6. And that was, his first declaration of, that he was going to move the embassy to Jerusalem. That's the first 6. That's the first thing that President Trump did that, was, harmful for the Jewish people. Because obviously because of the uproar, in Israel. And so that was the first 6. And then if we considered that his announcement to recognize the Golan Heights was the second thing that he did that was harmful for Israel, so that would be, kind of connected to the number 62. It's the second 6, it's 666, or you write it 62, and so if you consider that being the 62, which is what I really think God might be doing here, the verse goes on to say, so after the 62 weeks, the anointed one will be cut off and have nothing. And so I thought that was interesting, because what we see is that, sure, it looks good, that Trump was being pro-Israel. It looked like he was being pro-Israel when he moved the embassy to Jerusalem and when he said, I'm going to recognize the Golan Heights. But then when the peace plan came out, oh my gosh, it was all about the Palestinians and bringing prosperity to the Palestinians. And so you could definitely say if the anointed one, okay, so, in NASB, they, take that term, that Hebrew term that or it might be Aramaic, that means anointed one, and they translate it to say Messiah, but it, could actually mean anointed one too. And so if we consider, like Israel and the Jewish people being the anointed one, we can say after the 62 weeks, the anointed one was cut off and had nothing, because there really wasn't anything that was helpful to Israel in the peace plan at all, And so then, so that happened on June 22nd. That was when Jared Kushner released the financial plans for the, for the peace plan. And so I would consider that the third 6, 666, because obviously that was very detrimental for Israel. And then June 25th to 26th was when they had the peace conference in Bahrain. And so I wrote here that those happened on the 80th week, and then the 81st week was the second day of the peace conference. And I mean, to me, it was interesting that you have a 26, connected to this peace conference. Okay, so then, so looking at these verses, so it says, so after the 62 weeks, the anointed one was cut off and have nothing. And so, I listed those dates. I already talked about that. So what does it say happens next after the Messiah or the anointed one is cut off and has nothing? Then I highlighted, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. So I think that's what we are looking to happen next. Not that we're looking forward to it, but I think that's what's next on God's prophetic timetable, at least according to these verses. And so when you talk about the people of the prince who is to come, there's definitely a connection to those verses in Revelation where, it talks about, the sixth, or I guess it doesn't mention the sixth, but how, the guy who's one of the seventh, he becomes an eighth one, and, so I connected that to Obama because I definitely think we're going to see Obama come back. And so I believe he is the prince who is to come. And so there's people that are connected to him that are going to destroy the city and the sanctuary. And so what I believe is that there's, in Revelation, it talks about the abyss, and it talks about people finding the key to the abyss. Two of the people that I believe found the key to the abyss was President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, because all this stuff that they have done with, this peace plan and moving the embassy, they have really opened the door of the abyss of really getting the Palestinians to, really just amp up their riots against Israel. So I think they opened the door to the abyss, by their actions. And I believe that, it talks about, in Revelation, it talks about, the king of the abyss, and his name is like Abaddon and stuff like that, and so I definitely see a connection to Obama. So I definitely go take a look at those verses about the abyss in Revelation. And so what I think is, so what I believe is that Obama, because he is, the dragon, he's connected, he's the Antichrist, he's connected to hell and Satan and death. I think he's the king of the abyss. And then you have the Palestinians that come out of the same abyss. And so what I think we might see is we're going to see the Palestinians coming to destroy the city. I think they're definitely wanting to do that. And so, it'd just be when, God, allows them to do that they, then they'll do it. But also, it's possible that, there'd be a connection with Iran too. And, we'll just have to see what happens. I definitely think war is coming to Israel. So these verses talk about they will come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. And so I wrote city and sanctuary down there at the bottom of this slide, because what I think we're seeing in these verses is, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but there is a great connection between Israel and America, and especially prophetically speaking, because a lot of the stuff that happens in Israel also happens in America and vice versa. Like Israel has problems with their border and we have problems with our border. And Prime Minister Netanyahu is having problems with, kind of his opposition, and President Trump is having problems with his opposition. So there is definitely connections between the two countries. And if you, understand that, Israel, is kind of the land of the southern kingdom, and America is the land of the northern kingdom. You can understand why. Because we're brothers. Um, we're connected. We're all part of the same family. Um, and and so what I believe with the city and the sanctuary is that we're going to see judgment come to Israel, and then it's going to be followed by judgment coming to America. And we see that in the history of the nation of Israel. We saw that in the history where, and and it's interesting because it always starts with Judah, or the southern kingdom, because I believe that the Jewish people are the spiritual leaders of the nation of Israel, or they're going to be the spiritual leaders in the millennial kingdom. And so judgment starts with them. And so, I think the way God lists it, is, in his verses, he just, kind of throws those two judgments into the same sentence. And so that's what I think we're seeing here, is that, you know, that these people are going to come and destroy the city, and then these people are going to come and destroy the sanctuary. And so God just kind of lumps it all together in that verse. And so, so what I think we're going to see is, something happened to Jerusalem, and then, and so then I connect that word sanctuary to America. And, let's go to the next slide, and you'll see why I do that, why I connect it that way. So I see a connection with that phrase to these verses in Revelation. And so this is Revelation 11, where it's talking about the two witnesses. And it says, I will grant authority to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. When they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. Okay, so we see in this verse where God says the great city is mystically called Sodom and Egypt. And so I think what God is saying is that there's kind of this mystery here where, I'm bringing up Sodom and Egypt, because what God's trying to say is, what I think he's trying to say is that he's mentioning, we're going to see a repeat in history, and, we're going to see dead bodies in Israel, and we're going to see dead bodies in America. We're going to see the judgment in America. And so we see in the prophets, God identifies the southern kingdom, or Judah, to Sodom. And so then I believe that means Egypt is connected to the northern kingdom. And then, and so, the two witnesses, so what I see with the two witnesses is they prophesy for 1260 days. Okay, we see that kind of 666 number is kind of hidden in that 1260 days. And so they prophesy during the time frame of the 666 happening. And then it talks about them being olive trees and lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And so, if we think of, Jesus being Lord of the earth, and coming from the tribe of Judah, and so they're standing before the Messiah, or standing before the Jewish people, making decisions in their leadership that are affecting Israel. So that's what I kind of think. And Paul writes about, kind of a wild olive tree, and that would definitely connect to Trump. And maybe Netanyahu too, because he's, kind of gone rogue, and he's not, really following God's ways either, so he could be considered a wild olive tree too. So, reading these two verses together, it says, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. And then it says, the beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. So we definitely see a connection there. Okay, and so then, so then what happens then is that we see, okay, so, so I brought in the other verses, where it says, they would be killed, and then the, people from the peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations will look at their dead bodies through 3.5 days and will not permit their dead bodies to be laid in the tomb. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and celebrate, and they will send gifts to one another because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. Can you definitely see... I can definitely see people on the left in America celebrating if Trump gets killed. And then I can definitely see like Arabs celebrating if something happens to Israel. And then it says, but after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came into them, and they stood on their feet. And then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying, "Come up here." Then they went up to heaven in the cloud, and their enemies watched them. Okay, so then it goes on to say the second woe was past, and the third woe was coming quickly. And so, Revelation talks about 3 woes. And so what I think is the first woe is the judgment on Sodom, which I believe is Israel. And, I believe that is connected to the locust, which we read about in Revelation 9, verses 1 to 12. And that is the 5th trumpet. And it talks about the locust actually torment for 5 months. And so really, if the locusts are the Palestinians, it actually has been more than 5 months. It's been 15 months. And actually, so June 30th, if I got my math correct, was the 15th month after they started, it started March 30th of last year, I think, was when they, the Palestinians really started protesting against the stuff that Trump was doing. And just like weekly, every Friday, they're rioting, on the border. And so we passed the 15th month mark. And so what I think is kind of interesting is that in Revelation 9, it talks about the locusts tormenting for 5 months, but we, have actually seen the Palestinians tormenting, the people in Israel for 15 months. And so I'm wondering if, because President Trump has done 3 things, that God took the 5 months and multiplied it by 3. And so then you come up with 15 months. And so what's interesting about that is we see that number 15 and then 150 connected to the flood in the time of Noah. And so like the flood covers the mountains like 15 cubits high, and then the flood lasts, the flood waters last for 150 days. And so I definitely think there's some, kind of, God's kind of, I definitely think there could be a connection there with the numbers 15 and 150. And then for the second woe, so I think the second woe would be the judgment on Egypt, or the judgment on Trump, which, I think is connected to the judgment on Babylon. And it's kind of not really clear in Revelation. Things kind of get mixed together. And so it's hard to know how to separate them. because when it's talking about this, we see in Revelation 17 and 18 where we see the judgment on Babylon. But then when it's talking about the third woe, it talks about Babylon being remembered. And so there's kind of a mixing of, that judgment is, kind of like, the judgment on Babylon seems to be part of both the second woe and the third woe. Um, so we'll have to see how it plays out. And then I see for the second woe, I think that's connected to Revelation 9, 13, and 21, which is the sixth trumpet, where the four angels are released. And I think it's possible the four angels are Obama, Hillary, John Kerry, and the Pope. Although it has been interesting that President Trump right now is having problems with, because of what he said with those four. Well, they've said bad things too, but there's kind of this conflict going on between President Trump and the four, Democrats in Congress, the four women. That was just in the news tonight. So that was just kind of interesting to me, even though I don't really think they're the four angels. What I believe when we read about the four angels being released, it's like, they're kind of being tied up at the Euphrates, but the Euphrates dries up and then they're able to be released or whatever. And so I think it's possible that the Euphrates is connected to President Trump, and the drying up of the Euphrates, could be, something happens to either cause President Trump, to fall in the eyes, in people don't like him anymore. I definitely think this is what I'm thinking, is that if, something bad happens to Israel, he is definitely going to fall from grace, and so that could definitely set the stage for Obama kind of coming back. And so I think that's the second woe. And it's interesting, people, when they read those verses in Revelation 9, 13, and 21, they read it and they say, this is a war coming or something like that. But I don't think it necessarily has to be a war. The way it kind of talks about it, it could just be kind of like this war of words or whatever. We'll just have to see what happens. We definitely know that, Obama is coming back to cause destruction, is what it talks about. And then, but, a lot of the destruction that Obama and Hillary did the first time around really had a lot to do with their words, and then also kind of their political maneuverings. And so I don't know if it'd be a traditional war, but maybe more of kind of the same stuff they did when they were in office. And then I see the third woe, could be the judgment on America, Babylon. And so besides, us seeing that, so the reason why, I connect Babylon to Trump, I talk about that in one of my other videos too, because Babylon is, kind of this land of merchants, and we see Trump wheeling and dealing with this peace thing. And so, but with this third woe, it mentions Babylon in the seventh bowl, and that's found in Revelation 16, 17 to 21. And so then I wanted to talk more about, so what I wanted to talk about was what I kind of see when you take some of the other stories in the scripture. Like, I'm going to kind of fit in what I think to these different woes is, So what I see for like the first woe is, we read in the book of Daniel. What's interesting to me is in the book of Daniel, you have Daniel in the lion's den, and then you have Daniel and his three friends in the fiery furnace. So it's fascinating to me because they're very similar stories. And it almost makes you kind of go like, why do we need both these stories in the Bible? I mean, obviously they're cool stories, so we, would want them that way. But, why did God allow this to happen? And then, why is God kind of telling us like the same story? Real similar stories. I mean, one, they could be two stories telling us about the same event, or there's two events that are going to happen that are very similar. And that's what I believe, is that there's two events that are very similar. And so, um, so that's Daniel in the lion's den. I connect that to the first woe. And the reason why I connect that to the first woe is that, one, I already talked about the first woe being the judgment on Israel. And then with the lion's den, we have the lion. You know how, Jesus is the lion from the tribe of Judah. Their, symbolism is the lion. So that connects to Israel. And so what's really cool about the story, and so I wanted to bring some positive stuff to you, because if you read these stories, they're such stories of resurrection. And so, I mean, they just are the coolest stories. And so don't get down. I mean, bad things are going to happen, but we know, at the end there's resurrection, and that God is going to, bring resurrection to his kingdom and to his people. So they're just the neatest stories. And so we see Daniel survives in the lion's den. And then another similar story is, this is interesting because, with Lot. Okay, so remember who Lot is, that he's Abraham's nephew. So what's interesting about Lot is that there's kind of two different stories, like, kind of the same thing again, where they're kind of similar stories, where basically, Lot's on the move, and, or something bad is happening to Lot. And so the first one, it is the story, it's kind of like the story of 4 kings versus 5 kings, and Lot ends up getting kidnapped, and then Abraham has to come and, bring all his people to rescue Lot. So there's that story. And then there's also the story with Lot, has to flee Sodom because judgment is coming to Sodom. And there's those two stories in Genesis. So what's really interesting about Lot, or the story after Lot gets kidnapped, and then, what's really interesting about that story is that the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah, they fall into tar pits. Okay, they fall into tar pits. But then at the, which, okay, if you fall into a tar pit, I think you're going to die. I mean, I just don't know how you could survive if you fall into a tar pit. But at the end of the story, it talks about the king of Sodom coming back. And so there is resurrection in that story. So that is just an incredible story. And so I wanted to bring that up because these stories are really cool. We see resurrection in the Bible, and it's kind of subtle. You have to kind of pay attention and look for it. And then, because, I mean, God doesn't explicitly say, oh, by the way, the king of Sodom gets resurrected. He just, casually says, oh, and the king of Sodom came and talked to Abraham. Well, wait a minute, I thought he died. I thought he fell in the tar pit, So, so definitely just kind of funny how God does that. Okay, and so then, so I also mentioned, where we see in, I think it's in Luke, where it talks about Jerusalem being surrounded by armies. And oh, that's right. I wanted to make a connection to the story with Lot out of Sodom because, um, when the two angels come to Lot and they say, we're going to judge the city, take your family out of the city. um, they tell him to go to the mountains, and he goes, well, I don't want to go to the mountains. I want to go to this little city. So he ends up going to this little city, but then it's uncomfortable, and he really does end up going to the mountains. So what's interesting to that is if you connected to, when it talks about in Luke, where it talks about Jerusalem being surrounded. Let's see, I could actually find this here. Let's see. Yeah, here it is. This is in Luke 21, and it says, okay, yeah, here it goes. Okay, so verse 20, when it says, when you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city. So there's definitely a connection to the story of, Lot coming out of Sodom. Because we even see let those in the city get out. Lot wanted to go to the city, the little city, but it's like, you really shouldn't even be in the city. Go to the mountains. So definitely a connection there. So I think those are all connected to the first woe. And then in the second woe, like I said, we have the story with Daniel's 3 friends in the fiery furnace, and what's fascinating about that story is that they're there in the fiery furnace with Messiah. Messiah shows up. Someone like the son of the gods is in the furnace with them, so Messiah shows up. And then there's also the story with the Passover lamb. What's interesting is that in Egypt, you kind of have like, it's kind of interesting that you have God bringing judgment on Egypt's firstborn, and then he takes Israel out of the land of Egypt, so it's like, well, why are these two events necessary, and so, there's definitely a connection with, I really like the Passover story with the lamb's blood, because when judgment comes, God's people are safe, because their doors are covered by the lamb's blood. Great story. A great story of God's protection, in the midst of judgment. It kind of connects to, I think it's Psalm 91, where it says, like 1,000 fall at my right and the left, and, I am not harmed, and so we definitely see God's protection in that story. And then, like I said, the third woe could be connected to the Exodus story, where we see God's people actually come out of Egypt. And so then, let's see. So I wanted to bring up these verses. Okay, because I really want to emphasize that there is a happy ending for the story. So this is some of the verses from Daniel in the lion's den. Okay, and so let me read this to you. Then the king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him. Then the king arose at dawn, at the break of day, and went in haste to the lion's den. When he had come near the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke and said to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you constantly serve been able to deliver you from the lions? Then the king was very pleased and gave orders for Daniel to be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatsoever was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. Incredible story. Okay, So let's talk about this. What's interesting is that, so Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. The king was, I thought it was really cool that the king was not happy about it. And so he actually spent the night fasting. He was worried about Daniel. And, so if we look at that, if we remember that Judah, Jesus is the King of Kings, and so Judah is the kings. This could be a picture of, just the Jewish people, like this could be a picture of the Jewish people in America are fasting because, like obviously if something were to happen to the Jewish people in Israel, the Jewish people in America would just be, depressed and, and, like just in mourning, and wearing sackcloth and stuff like that. And we see in the book of Esther where, she talks about, they were going, her and her maids were gonna mourn for 3 days or fast for 3 days, and then the Jewish people were supposed to fast for 3 days. So I definitely think this could be a connection to, the 3.5 days that we read about in Revelation, and so the king, we're gonna see people fasting and wearing sackcloth when something happens to Israel. But see, this is why you got to read the story, because this tells you what's going to happen. So then in verse 19, and I like that this is verse 19 because there's definitely a connection with that number 19, to Messiah. Because Revelation 19 is definitely connected to, Jesus, the Messiah. And so what I like about it is it says, then the king arose at dawn. And so, I think what we could see is, I'm not real clear of the timing on things. If, something won't happen to Israel until Messiah comes, or the Messiah comes after something happens to Israel. We'll just have to wait and see. I don't know for sure. But what's interesting is that, I'll finish this story and then I'll bring up the other story. And so it says, then the king arose at dawn. And so we see that picture of resurrection. I mean, that's like the resurrection story, because they were at the tomb, at dawn, looking for Jesus. So we see a picture of Jesus's resurrection there. And then it says, at the breaking day, and went in haste to the lion's den. So obviously when Jesus comes back to earth, I think a high priority to him would be to go deal with, the Israel, the Jewish people in Israel, and then, okay, and so then, like I said, no injury whatsoever was found on Daniel. Really cool story. Okay. And so then I brought in, I was just about to mention this story. I also brought in the story of Lazarus, because I definitely think there's a connection with this. So Lazarus was a really good friend of Jesus, and Jesus had heard that Lazarus was sick, and, and that he was going to die. And so what's really interesting about it is that, he tells his disciples, he says, well, Lazarus is sleeping. And they're like, well, gosh, if he's sleeping, he's going to be fine. He'll wake up again, And it's so funny because Jesus does this a lot in the Gospels, where he talks about dead people being asleep, and they laugh at him when he does that. And it's just hilarious because it's God teaching us about resurrection. When people are when people are dead, as believers in Yeshua, as believers in Jesus, if we believe in their resurrection, they're not really dead. They're just sleeping. We will see them again. Is such a cool picture of resurrection. And so anyways, so what's interesting about the Lazarus story is that so then Jesus, hears that Lazarus is sick, but he waits to go there. He doesn't go there right away. There's a delay. So I think that's kind of interesting. I think that's a connection to Jesus' second coming, that we're going to see a delay. Something is going to happen to Israel, and then we'll see a delay. And I think it's possible it could be that 3.5 days. The 3.5, you know, that we see in Revelation. But in the story of Lazarus, which I think's in the book of John, it's when Jesus actually goes to call Lazarus out of the tomb. They're like, well, he's been in the tomb 4 days. So there's that number 4. Is kind of similar to 3.5 days. So we'll see what happens. So I found these verses, and because this is kind of the purpose of me doing this video, is because I really want to remind you of this verse in Thessalonians. So this is from 1 Thessalonians 4:13-18. It says, "But we do not want you to be uninformed, brethren, about those who are asleep, so that you will not grieve as do the rest who have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep in Jesus. For this we say to you by the word of God, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, and the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore, comfort one another with these words." So I wanted to comfort you because I think we're going to see some bad things happening. I think we're going to see some bad things happen to Israel. I think it's going to cause great mourning, to happen on the earth. There's those verses that talk about, I mentioned in one of my previous videos about the sign of the Son of Man, and then it talks about, then there be this mourning. Well, after I kind of was studying this, I realized that maybe the picture of the Son of Man, the sign of the Son of Man, could be a picture of something happened to Israel. And then this mourning happens. This great mourning, and people in sackcloth, this grief, because of what happened. Because how, we don't want to see the Holocaust happen again. I think because, we're all talk and no action, we haven't really done anything to keep, a second Holocaust from happening. And, so I think we're going to be grieving, that we didn't do something to keep this from happening. And I also kind of think it's, kind of connected to Benjamin, where, Benjamin, he gets, Joseph's cup gets put in his sack, and so then he kind of gets in trouble and his brothers are all grieving. I think that's the same story. So anyways, I think it's interesting, so these verses, we've heard different people say different things about these verses and what they mean. But I really am wondering how much they're connected to what we're going to see happen to Israel. And then it's interesting that, God chooses to use that word. We don't want you to be uninformed about those who are asleep, that's the same word that Jesus uses to talk about Lazarus, being dead. And then he says, so that you will not grieve as do the rest who have no hope. So we want to grieve, but don't lose your hope, because there's resurrection coming. God has a plan. And so if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, which means we believe in resurrection, then we can believe that God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep in Jesus. Okay, so what if you take that word, what if you, instead of saying Jesus, what if you say Messiah? So it says, even so, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep in Messiah. So that's a little more Jewish sounding there. And so, so that's what I'm wondering, is it, is this what these verses are talking about? That when Jesus comes, he's going to bring, I actually, think he's going to, like we read in the previous verse, he's going to quickly, go to Lazarus' tomb, or the lion's den, because he's concerned about the Jewish people and he's going to resurrect them. And then, so it talks about us being that those who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will not precede those who have fallen asleep. So what I think it is that we won't, the people that are remaining that didn't get killed, by this attack on Israel, which would be a lot of the people in America. All of us in America, unless we're visiting Israel at the time, we will be the ones that are alive and remain. We're not going to precede those who have fallen asleep. Jesus will bring resurrection to the Jewish people first, and then bring resurrection to us. And then we will, the dead in Christ, the dead in Messiah will rise first, and then we will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so what I believe is that, that's kind of like, joining Moses on the mountain. We're going to go up onto Mount Zion. And so, so I just wanted to make the connection again with the 3.5 days. There was a connection to the 4 days with Lazarus being in the tomb, and then the connection to, back to Daniel 9:27, where it says he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. So if you see the Jewish people being killed as a type of sacrifice or a type of offering, obviously the Palestinians, or the Arabs killing, the Jewish people, that is kind of like a sacrifice to their gods, and so, Jesus, this is, the more and more I study this, I really think this verse really is connected to Jesus. Jesus is the one who's going to come and make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. And in the middle of this week, where he's here, he's going to put a stop to, what happened in Israel, or the war in Israel, or he's going to resurrect them, or whatever. Because, we see in the beginning of the story of Esther where there's a banquet for 180 days, so that's connected to the 666, and then there's a banquet for 7 days. And so if you understand that we're under judgment now because our president did not bless Israel, and so now we are all under judgment. And so now we need the Messiah to set us free from this judgment. And so we need Jesus to come and set us free from the covenant that Trump set up, with his actions. We need the Messiah to come and make a new covenant with us. So I think, yeah. Okay, so then let me actually talk about what the title of the video is, because don't you hate that when people have a title and then never talk about it? So I definitely want to make sure I don't do that. My title I was talking about the 77th plus 7th week. And And so I mentioned in one of my other videos how there's kind of this mystery with the 77 and the 777 and sevenfold and all that stuff. So here are the verses where these numbers come up. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77fold. And then Genesis 5:31 says all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. And then Matthew 18:22, Jesus says to him, like he's talking to Peter, I think, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. That's when he's wondering, how often should I forgive? And so I definitely think there's some kind of mystery here. And so I thought it was interesting that on week 77 was when Netanyahu was unable to form his government, and there was a call for a new election. That happened on May 29th, 2019. What was fascinating to me is the next day on May 30th. It was interesting that it was like, I talked about, like the 70 week was kind of like the fullness of sin. Now, when Netanyahu was reelected, it was kind of like Trump and Netanyahu, were like completely free to, do this whole peace deal that President Trump had. That they, there wasn't anything stopping them until there was, until week 77 when there was something stopping them. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then what's interesting was that on May 30th was the Air Force Academy graduation. So Donald Trump came to talk at the Air Force Academy graduation. And what was really interesting is that they had the Thunderbirds, and there was usually 6 planes, but one of the planes was downed because of a bird accident. Caused some damage on the plane. And so it was interesting that it was like 6 planes to 5. So what I think is kind of interesting, I think God's kind of been doing this a lot where something will happen, and then the next day something else happens. And when you put the 2 events together, you kind of see this picture of what God's trying to show. And so I think what we're seeing is kind of this downfall of Netanyahu and Trump. And so, where you have Trump kind of connected to the 666, it was interesting to me that you went from 6 planes to 5 planes, because 5 is a number connected to Judah. So I think I was kind of saying that there's gonna be a graduation coming, and that we're gonna move from Donald Trump's 666 to 5. We're gonna move to Messiah. And so then. So weeks, if you add 7 more weeks to week 77, that's going to get you to be week 84, which is tomorrow, which actually now on my time frame, it's today, July 17, 2017. So definitely a high watch day. Want to see I am very fascinated to see what's going to happen. So I also wanted to talk about the 7th month, because I guess I'd be really surprised if something doesn't happen this month, because it's just been kind of an incredible month so far, and like we're only 2 weeks in here. So let's talk about the 7th month. What's interesting to me is that we always have heard this expression about Christmas in July, and like right now Hallmark is playing Christmas movies for their Christmas in July. And then the last couple days Amazon has had their Prime Day, which they which has been called like the Black Friday of summer. And how Black Friday is kind of your day to go Christmas shopping. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then so let's talk about what's been happening so far. So on July 1st, Tyler Skaggs, the Angels baseball player, died. What was interesting to me is that he was number 45. Okay, President Trump is number 45. He's the 45th president. So I think God might be sending us a message there. And what's interesting to me is that the next day, July 2nd, was when there was that total solar eclipse down in Chile, down in South America. And so I'm kind of wondering if that that is a 40-day warning for President Trump, because July 2nd was 7 weeks after May 14th, and it's 40 days before 8/11. So don't know, but that's a thought that I had. And then on July 4th was when we saw, so that was the day that President Trump had his big celebration in Washington. And then they actually had a celebration in the embassy in Jerusalem on that day that, Netanyahu went to, and he was there drinking wine. And that was when he said that he was going to keep an open mind about President Trump's peace plan. Thought that was kind of interesting. So what was interesting is that we saw a 6.4 earthquake in California. So I thought that was kind of interesting because it could have been God's way of saying, Netanyahu saying he had an open mind was, like this fourth, sixth, another bad thing, for Israel. Not good. And then what was interesting to me is the next day, July 5th, we saw a 7.1 earthquake in California. So like I said, keep an eye on when, things happen in twos. And so it was interesting because they thought, the 6.4 was the big one. And then it was like the big one happened the next day. So it's interesting to me that happened when we're in the 71st year of Israel. It was interesting that it happened on the 5th, which is the number of Judah, the number of Messiah. So that was interesting. And then on July 8th, we saw DC, Washington, DC, and Virginia had flooding like unprecedented, never happened before flooding. Although I thought a year ago in July there was flooding too, also in DC and Virginia. But definitely interesting. And then on July 10th was when we saw a potential tropical cyclone in the Gulf of Mexico, which ended up turning into Tropical Storm Barry. So it's interesting that started on July 10th. The 10 number is connected to Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, or maybe Judgment or something like that. And then on July 11th, this is just kind of weird, but I thought I'd bring it up because I thought it was weird. On July 11th, we saw 3 sets of missing bones. Oh, they have this really weird mystery going on with the Vatican where they're trying to find this missing girl that, that got lost a long time ago, that they never were able to solve. And, so they've been digging up, supposedly digging up bodies to try to find, these girls' bones. And what's interesting is that they dug up stuff and, they not only did not find these girls' bones, but they didn't find the 2 sets of bones from the people that were supposed to be buried there. So there's 3 sets of missing bones at the Vatican. So I thought that was very interesting that happened on the 11th, 7/11. So we didn't see Judgment on 7/11, but maybe we saw a picture of there's judgment coming or something like that. Or a picture of bones, So, anyways, so then on July 11th and 12th, we had Tropical Storm Barry. What was interesting on July 12th was when the LA Angels won 13-1. Which they were happy about because the next day on the 13th was Tyler Skaggs' birthday. So they saw a connection to the 13th there. And so then on the 13th, so this was really interesting, was Tropical Storm Barry turned into Hurricane Barry on the 13th. Okay, well, so I thought that was really interesting because I definitely connect the number 13 to Obama. 13, 23 are numbers that I connect to Obama. Like the 2300 days in Daniel, I think, are connected to Obama. And then what's interesting is with this hurricane, they kept talking about the 2016 flooding. Well, if you remember the 2016 flooding, Barack Obama was well, Barry is connected to Barack, that some people call him Barry. What's interesting to me was that in 2016, Barack Obama was out playing golf or whatever. He was on vacation when this, flooding event happened, down in Louisiana. And, people were kind of upset that President Obama wasn't willing to cut his vacation short, to go, offer, to go down and visit them and see how things were going. But what was interesting was during that time, Trump and Pence, who were running for office, they went down to Louisiana. And so it's kind of interesting because they were really acting very presidential while Obama wasn't. And in the 2016 flooding. And then what was sad too was that 13 people died in the 2016 flooding. And so I think what we were seeing was that God was showing us that it was like Obama was dying and then Trump and Pence were going to rise in power. And then what was very interesting, okay, so we see a connection to this, to the 2016 flooding, because I think what we're seeing is now we're seeing the reverse. And so I think what we're seeing is Trump dying and that Barack Obama is getting ready to rise to power again. And so what was interesting is that, I think God's showing a picture of this in these events. And then we'll see it actually play out. And so on July 13th, it was interesting too that we saw the blackout in New York City. Okay, so definitely a connection with New York City, Times Square to President Trump. Definitely a connection to Babylon. All the stores and everything in Times Square and all the advertising. And so there was a blackout. They couldn't advertise. All their billboards went dead. So then on July 14th, so the day after Hurricane Barry was July 14th, which was the 4-year anniversary of Obama's Iran deal. That was a big day prophetically because that was, when I think, when they voted in the Iran deal, and then it was also when the Planned Parenthood videos were released. That's when we found out that they were selling body parts. Oh, so disgusting, selling body parts and stuff. So that, very interesting, the connection with that. And then, really, we haven't seen God's judgment yet on Obama because of this Iran deal. And so I think we're going to start seeing things played out now. And then on July 16th to the 17th was the lunar eclipse. They also said it was the full buck moon. So kind of like a blood moon. So definitely very interesting. What's interesting to me, like I mentioned before, July 17th was week 80, is week 84. Today is week 84. Today is also, today being July 17th is also the 21st day after the peace conference. Don't know if it's the first day, like 21 days after the 25th or 21 days at 26th, not sure about that. And then on July 19th, okay, so this is really interesting to me, is that's when The Lion King, the remake, opens in the theaters. You got that number 19, which keeps showing up. So very interesting to me. What's interesting too is that is actually 10 months from Yom Kippur. And then it's also 5 months from the snow moon. And then July 20th is actually the 24th day after the peace conference. The reason why 21 and 24 are interesting is because we see Daniel mourning for 21 days. And then on the 24th day, he gets a visit from, I think, the angel Gabriel, in the book of Daniel. And then what else is interesting about July 20th is that is the anniversary of the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11th moon landing. And then they're all planning to dig up some other bones at the Vatican. I thought that was kind of interesting. That happens on July 20th. And then it's on the Hebrew calendar, it's Tammuz 17, which is the day that 5 calamities happened. And it's also the day that Moses returned and tore down the golden calf. So the Jewish people, it's really interesting because the rabbis believed that if they didn't build the golden calf back when Moses came down from the mountain, if they didn't build the golden calf at that time, they would have seen the Messiah. They would have seen the ushering in of the Messianic kingdom. But instead, they built the golden calf, and so then the Messianic era got put on hold. That's what they believe. So it's just kind of an interesting story. So we definitely want to keep an eye on that date when they believe, was the day that Moses returned. Definitely a high watch day. And then, Steve Fletcher mentioned that July 27th, Steve Fletcher is always good for information about Obama. He's got a good handle on what's Obama up to. And so he made the connection that July 27th is the anniversary of Obama at the Democratic National Convention, and that happened in 2004. Another 15, that happened 15 years ago, so that is fascinating. Okay, and so I wanted to bring this up. So I mentioned about how on Friday, 7/19, is the opening of the Lion King, and I found this was on the AMC website. This was their advertising for the movie, and I already talked about how their it was powerful. Their trailer, way back in February when they were advertising this movie coming out, was really powerful. Because they have, what is it? That guy with that really low voice, saying it is time. I'm just really powerful. So go listen to that if you haven't heard that yet. But I just loved this advertising because it says, "Be there when the king returns." I would love to be there when the king returns. And I hope you are there when the king returns. Since I don't believe in rapture, I believe that we're going to see the king return. This is powerful to me. But it was sad to me that I read that, so how President Trump was giving Barack Obama a hard time about not being born in America. Well, apparently, in reaction, President Trump, Obama, made some joke about his birth video, and it was, a clip from The Lion King. And so he's kind of stealing. Let me tell you, he's stealing this picture of the Lion King for himself, which I think Obama has been really good at stealing messianic signs, to try to, make himself look like the Messiah. But let me tell you, Mr. Obama, there is only one true Lion King, and you are not it. It is Yeshua HaMashiach, Yeshua HaMashiach, the Messiah, Jesus the Messiah. And so I am waiting for the true Lion King to come, and that is Jesus. And so um, I hope you are waiting. I hope you are excited about being there when the King returns. I thank you so much for listening to this video. I hope it was helpful. I really am hoping it would bring comfort to you when bad things happen, and that you look forward to the resurrection that Jesus is going to bring. So that's my video. I thank you for tuning in, and God bless, and we will catch you later.